Hey, what's up everybody? It's your boy Proftrof and we are back again with another video. Y'all wanted to see some armored bikini, so here we are. This is, can the fantasy barbarian bikini armor be realistic? Okay, let's be honest, before we start this video. Can an armored bikini really be useful in combat? The answer is obviously fuck no. Like, the point of armor is to protect, the vital bits, like your heart, like your brain. An armored bikini, yes, it protects your genitalia, but I mean, technically, it poses the questions. If you get your dick cut off, is life worth living? I'll let you all ponder that while we start and watch Shad's video. I'ma like it because Shad is a very nice human being. I adore this dude. He is awesome. So let's get to it.
This episode of Shadiversity is brought to you by the Swords shirt, which proclaims the truth that every sword enthusiast knows down to their core, that swords are awesome. Why? Because swords! That's why. Available through Teespring, link in the description.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and let's talk about the fantasy barbarian as made iconic and popular by really Conan the Barbarian. That's
True.
the movie series that kicked it off, even though it was based off of a book series, but the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan the Barbarian movies are very loosely based off the books, okay? As with most things in fantasy, this is quite an unrealistic thing, but there's a problem with it being unrealistic, and it's that they're awesome. Come on, the idea of this powerful warrior from a strange, savage yet noble culture, fighting without fear and able to fall into a bloodlust rage, they're willing to take on any enemy. I mean, this is just, all of it is awesome. And the barbarians' lack of armor, and indeed the level of skin that they show, also reflects this, their fearlessness and their prowess. So then, how can we have this awesomeness and make it a bit more realistic and believable? Before we go any further, let me just say that if you have a problem with this type of barbarian, the female fantasy barbarian, and you think it's objectifying of women and immodest, well, you should then also have a problem with this type of barbarian. It's a simple matter of being morally and ethically consistent. And
Yo, is my boy wearing a fucking strap? Or however you call that shit in English? Boy, why?
don't get me wrong,
Where is your armored bikini, my friend? Where?
I get the complaints about the classic female fantasy warrior always wearing a bikini and stuff like that. It is just that that standard is also carried over to males for male fantasy barbarians. And also just fantasy in general. Men are just as capable of being objectified as women. And this is where, yes, of course, the primary unrealistic thing
Yo, why does the left side and the right side of his abs look like finished, unfinished? What the fuck? It looks like a turkey being baked. Finished, unfinished.
rises, which is their armor,
What
their
game is that?
protection, because any warrior who has any
Okay, you guys were wondering what would happen if you went to war with this type of armor? Well, there you go. You die pretty quickly.
brains would know that going into battle wearing so little is very much a death wish. But part of me is disappointed by that, because the classic fantasy barbarian, like I said, is awesome. And so let's have a look at it and find out first what is wrong, okay? What would be going through these warriors' minds in terms of their approach to battle, and is there a way for the fantasy barbarian to be realistic in a sense that it could be plausible for them to look the way they do but still be competent warriors? Unbeknownst to many, there are actual historical accounts of people who went into battle not just wearing little.
Yeah. Do you notice something wrong with this picture? This bitch got hooves, my guy. She a cow. Look, big titties, hooves, cow.
But full-blown naked. For instance, the Celts. There are direct historical accounts mentioning certain Celtic warriors going into battle naked, wearing...
I mean, how did that end for them? Okay, let's do a quick survey. Do you wanna be this naked degenerate? Or would you like to be the Chad warrior over here with his chainmail, his nice ass headpiece, looking all amazing and shit, or would you like to be this fucking disgusting degenerate? Tell me down in the comments, who would you like to be, this or this?
Nothing but their
Come on.
arms, meaning armaments and weapons. This is also reflected by certain African tribes and certainly some Mediterranean cultures during the classical period. So right here we have already found that it's incorrect to say that scantily clad warriors didn't exist. Indeed, there were historic warriors, as we mentioned, that fought naked. Not just loincloths, naked. So that answers that. Please do take note that not all Celtic warriors fought naked. There was just enough to have made a specific note of by the people who observed them. And also, in contrast to the fact that there were some Celtic warriors who fought naked, they didn't go around not wearing clothes in their everyday lives, because clothing is a very practical thing. And so on the flip side to fighting without clothes, there is the concept of cultural modesty, and in regards to the barbarians, this seems to be...
Just a quick second. Let's think about this a little bit more. So you're going into battle naked. Okay, I just want y'all to think about what happens to your pee-pee when you go outside and it is cold. Now think about this. You are in a battle line with your bros and you see a naked dude running towards you. That dude has... Okay. I'm not sure how to word this into words and make a sentence. That dude's dick is non-existent because it is cold. It's a small pee-pee. Would you get intimidated, or would you like laugh a little bit before you stab him to death?
Be there.
Now, why did I say all that? I don't know.
Level of dress all the time, not just in battle. So of course we're going to look at that, the practicality of this style of dress in combat, but first in everyday life, how culture can affect the standards of dress. This is an interesting subject for me because, as many of you know, I'm a Mormon, and Mormons take modesty fairly seriously. And to my own Mormon standards, the level of dress that we see on these two warriors, I would consider immodest. But what we have to understand here is that what is considered immodest in one culture can be considered perfectly normal in another. For a large number of very sophisticated reasons, different cultures end up sexualizing different parts of the body. Have you ever seen those hair coverings that are worn prominently in certain medieval periods and cultures? Well, that is because that revealing one's hair in open public was considered very immodest, as equivalent to, say, showing a lot of skin. But in contrast to this specific period, there are a lot of cultures, like a lot of medieval cultures and stuff, where showing as much cleavage as possible wasn't considered immodest, or having a really low back on a dress. Not immodest, but your hair? Don't you dare show that hair. That's scandalous. Modesty is more determined by the culture, and I believe in modest dress according to the culture that you live in. Also, in other medieval periods, men drawing attention to their crotch was not considered immodest, but a demonstration of manly virility and masculinity. You've heard of the codpiece? There were some ridiculously big codpieces in the past. Do you find knees attractive? Me, not so much, alright? But back in the day, my goodness, seeing, the leg at the knee revealed or anything above there, but even just the knee alone, that was scandalous, but also damn sexy as well. Because culture is in large measure what determines what parts of the body are sexualized and what isn't. There are some cultures where having, tiny feet was a big sexual turn on. And other cultures where having lip piercing, stretched out bottom lips, very sexy. Again, this is all cultural conditioning. The other significant element that affects the kind of standard...
Shut, you cannot put this. Give me a fucking warning, my guy. I shall not go back in this video to check out those disgusting feet. I shall not. Okay.
Of modesty in cultures is also climate.
Bro,
you'll find in the more tropical and just hotter areas, so even in the desert-like areas, it is not uncommon for these cultures to show more skin than other ones. Now, it's not universal, because you'll also find other cultures in hot areas that have completely different levels of modesty, where a lot is expected to be covered up.
Yeah. Look at this dude's face. Why does he have such a small face? He has a big body, small face. Big body, small face. Normal face, normal face, normal face, small face. Look at this dude. He has like a
expected to be covered up. Practicality also plays a role in modesty, where when undertaking a certain task, the type of dress that is practical for that task might not be considered immodest, where in normal everyday life it would be. For instance, it's a very common thing for men to take off their tops when undertaking heavy labour or working out in the sun. Why? Because, the sweat, open air, it helps you cool down better. Also when undertaking sports activity, and this varies depending on the type of sport and the kind of the period it's in, but generally you will find almost universally that when undertaking a sports activity, it is permitted for people to wear less clothing than what is generally considered proper in normal everyday life. Even now in the modern day, have a look at what athletes wear compared to normal dress. There's quite a big difference in the amount of skin it covers, isn't there? Now this is interesting because it can also apply to barbarians in the sense that a barbarian is a warrior and they are undertaking intense physical activity as if they're adventurers or they're a profession, they're the type of soldier of their culture. This can also affect and determine the amount of clothing that they wear. So yes, modesty is very much a cultural thing, and for barbarians, it is very easy to write into their culture, within their culture, that their standards of modesty are far different, to the point where men going around topless is considered completely normal, and women walking around in the equivalent of fur-like bikinis. Now, again, women wearing fur-like bikinis and men wearing loincloths, those are completely equivalent in my mind. And if it was a cultural thing and I lived in that culture, I would not consider this level of dress immodest either, because that is determined by, like I said, by culture. And the fact that we can draw historical parallels to actual, cultures that have comparable levels of modesty, this is not an unrealistic thing. The issue is, though, even in cultures that have very, very different...
At the moment I'm trying to resist making a fucked up joke really, really, really hard. So I would, Shad, I would appreciate it if you could move from these pictures a little bit faster.
Of modesty to our own. When it comes to battle and warfare, even the most basic of warrior understands the concept of protection. Now, there are some African tribes that don't wear much clothing, but when they go to war, they use hide-like shields, which could be the answer. You can just give them shields, and I think that could work, but the issue is, the question they have to ask them is, if these cultures that have very low levels of modesty, so they don't wear many clothes, if they had access to technology that could offer them far greater levels of protection, would they take it? And I think the fairly obvious and evident answer is, of course they would. If it's a choice between life and death, this, level of armament can save my life, they'll take the armament. So with this perspective, the fantasy barbarian is seeming fairly unrealistic, because in almost every setting, they exist in line, like in the same world as warriors.
Hey. Oh, you're knowledgeable boys. Do you know what this picture is? This is Pathfinder. This RPG is amazing.
Or cultures that have much higher levels of armament, and there's a lot of cross-pollination in regards to technology, cultures, a lot of interaction, basically. And so barbarians would see other guys wearing heavy armor, and if they have any brains, they'll be able to figure out the advantages. Now, there is a reason that might explain why the classic fantasy barbarian cultures choose not to adopt this more advanced armor, and that is the concept of freedom of movement. This is a complex subject because it is also very misunderstood, where people think wearing full plate armor weighs you down to the point that you can't even run or get on a horse independently. That's all bullcrap. The restriction of movement in full plate armor is far less than what is prominently reported. But of course...
Hey, cool Adidas shoes, bro. I bet all the knights in the 14th century wore Adidas.
Of course, there is a level of restriction of movement. It doesn't weigh nothing, but if properly trained and used to wearing it, a person can pretty much do most of the movements that you could do without. Having said that, though, it is also obvious, without even needing to be said, that without the armor, even though they can maintain normal level of movement, if they are fit enough to maintain normal level of movement, without the armor they could do superior level of movement, not to the point where they could do flips where they couldn't in armor, because armor does restrict your movement, but not nearly as much as people say or believe. Aside from being restrictive in movement, armor also makes it hard to breathe and also hard to cool down. When you're exerting a lot of physical energy,
Hey, y'all know what makes it hard to breathe as well? Getting a fucking arrow shot through your heart. That makes it pretty hard to breathe, or even more through your fucking lungs because you had no fucking armor. Eh,
okay, having padded layers, or like, now it's interesting, the padding under armor that can vary, but their arming doublet of course has a level of padding, and then if they have mail over the joints and then the armor on top as well, that'll get pretty hot inside. And we all know that when you're doing sport and large physical activity, it actually feels a lot better, and you can maintain your activity, your energy exertion to a much greater level if your skin is open to the air, where your sweat can, the moisture can cool down on the air and then cools down your body. Every sports outfit that exists in just look at the Olympics, okay? When you're undertaking a high level of physical exertion, less clothes is good. Back in the original Olympics, they did it naked. This concept of extended physical activity would clearly be restricted by armor of any type, whether this was gambeson, mail, full plate, or even armors from other cultures.
God.
And there are...
Can we just appreciate how nice this looks? Looks so fucking awesome.
some circumstances in like a fight, say if you're in one-on-one duel, where it's not the person with the greatest level of armaments who will win, but it's the person who can fight for the longest and just last longer than their opponent, and if the opponent gets so tired where they just can't fight anymore and they collapse, well then they're dead, and it doesn't matter how much armor they're wearing then.
Wait until you pick up. You good?
I mean, we've seen that if anyone has seen any combat sports, UFC, boxing, stuff like that, cardio is like one of the most important factors. We've seen time and time again people lose because of their shit cardio, so...
And so for the person wearing armor, the better tactic for them is to end the fight quickly. They're almost invincible depending on what level of armor they're wearing, and just rush the person and let them try and flail helplessly on your plates. They're not going to bust through it or anything like that, and just kill them. Get the fight over and done with quickly, because the longer you have to fight, the more tired you're going to become, and wearing such high levels of armor is going to make you tire quicker. So I do think it could be feasible that there could be a culture that considered high levels of armaments detrimental to the point that they didn't prefer it because they put a massive level of value on being able to fight for a long period of time. Now, it doesn't mean that they would go in suicidal, because I think like that concept that armor is very important, and if you're ever wondering what is ultimately more advantageous, being able to fight longer without wearing heavy armaments or having heavy armaments which would tire you quicker, history has answered that because there was a lot of people testing this in real life warfare and battle, and it seems to be that the universal conclusion amongst every single culture was that wearing armor was better. So I don't think it would make...
In war there wasn't usually like it wasn't an all-out brawl where, when the lines meet, I remember this from the Roman show, when the lines of the two opposing armies meet and the front line of one of them becomes really tired, they would just swap with the ones behind them. So those could rest and the fresher guy can take on the front. So there is stuff like that. I mean, it's not like the front line needs to... If they get so tired, they just die out of exhaustion. No, I mean, there's other people behind them. That's why there was lines and shit, right?
Makes sense that this culture would throw away armor and protection completely. I think they'd want a certain level of protection, and perhaps they might look for a balance. And so I think the answer to this would be shields. If a warrior culture truly felt that freedom of movement was crucially important to the way that they trained and fought, to the point that they didn't want to sacrifice that by just loading on massive amounts of armor, I do think that to them, a big large shield would satisfy the obvious advantage of having some level of protection to protect you from arrow fire and things like that, which answers the blatant impracticality of warriors going in wearing lower levels of armor. And their primary tactic then wouldn't be to just rush and rely on their shields and go toe to toe. Their primary tactic would be to use their shield to protect them and continue the fight, get the opponent to run, chase them down, defend, engage, and then they'd withdraw and stuff like that, to the point that they just wear their opponents down completely, to the point that they just can't run, and then the fight's over. And if that's their style of fighting, wearing the least amount of clothing possible would be advantageous to them. So this is how I think...
Not really. Like in a 1v1 maybe, in a small group to small group skirmishes maybe, in war not really. I mean, this is why usually you have cavalry, you have archers, if they disengage, shoot them. If you cannot engage, if they disengage beyond the range of your archers, just run them down with horses. It's not just melee.
The fantasy barbarian could exist in a realistic and practical sense. The answer being they would need shields. Without shields, even they would understand going into a battle against someone who is wearing heavy armor and you're not, and all you have is, your loincloth or your leather hide bikini, and you just have a single weapon. Even they would understand that is very much suicide. And what I find interesting about the historical parallels that we can draw from the historical warriors that went into battle basically naked, specifically the Celts and the Zulu warriors, is that they too used shields. Yes, very interesting indeed. So perhaps we've stumbled upon a very significant factor in regards to this analysis. And so if you ever see a scantily clad warrior barbarian, well, I think it is, you would be in your rights to say this is very unrealistic if they don't have a shield. But if they do have a shield, well, as we've found out, there's precedent for it. Now, would these barbarians wear partial elements of armor, say a single pauldron on their left shoulder, or their left arm being fully armored and nothing else, or maybe just a single breastplate?
Jesus.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts in regards to this question. My first thought is if these partial bits of armor are in addition to a shield, then yes, absolutely, they can definitely be beneficial, especially if these partial bits of armor are in the manner of, say, greaves or some type of shin coverings. If you're using a shield, one of the most vulnerable parts for you when you're using a shield is actually your head and then your feet and shins. A left shoulder guard, protecting that shoulder that peeks out above, the shields, depending on the size, and of course, a helmet. All these pieces of armor would be extremely beneficial. And if these warriors were...
What's this from? That's a Roman shield. Is this from Warhammer? Damn, this dude looks amazing. Is that a mace?
Armor
Jesus.
Would be extremely beneficial. And if these warriors were so concerned about freedom of movement, these smaller partial bits of armor would not weigh them down significantly at all, and there would be enough of their skin exposed to be able to exert themselves to their full and still be able to cool down and try and push themselves further, just like any athlete. Now, in regards to partial bits of armor in substitution of a shield, well, the big problem is arrows, okay? If this warrior is coming against any type of ranged, weapon, an arm that is clad top to bottom in armor would not be able to deflect arrow fire, and, unless there are a superhuman, warrior and stuff like that. But no, the area of protection is not great enough to be able to fend off, or just see where the arrow's coming in and block. But if they're fighting in melee, well, having a fully armored arm can actually function quite effectively as a shield in and of itself, because just in hand-to-hand combat, you generally block and deflect with your arms and forearms and hands, and you would be able to put yourself in a position to block attacks and stuff with your arm quite effectively. In regards to wearing a single breastplate and nothing else, well, if the whole reason that these warriors don't wear armor is because they believe it's too restrictive and hinders their ability to fight for longer periods of time, I think a breastplate would start to cross that line for them. As for partial bits of armour on other parts of the body that I haven't mentioned, there are some armour pieces that are absolutely ridiculous and truly pointless that are put on, fantasy style barbarians in artwork and other depictions. For instance, have a look at this picture. The metal bra thing is very stupid. There's no point in having it made out of metal because it's not really protecting any vital organs. She might as well just
It is okay. She has a dick. God. That is okay.
have cloth covering her upper body and relieve herself of the extra weight. Because if she really wanted to protect her upper body, she'd be wearing a full breastplate, not a breast bra plate thing. And the most important part, that you'd want to protect on your legs is most of the thigh and the shins. But she's only got metal plates over her knees, which it doesn't make sense. It's very nonsensical. So these are my thoughts on the classic fantasy barbarian and how they can still be realistic and practical while still retaining the classic visual style of these warriors. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. Please share your own thoughts in the comments below if you think I might have got something wrong, or if there's another way in which you feel the classic fantasy barbarian could exist more realistically in a fantasy setting. I hope to see you next time, and until then, farewell.
Well, I already said my piece. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Barbarians, yay or nay? I've said my piece. Fuck barbarians. Give me an armored lad that throws a javelin, has like 2 more weapons on him, and stabs people in the asshole. That is what I want. Fuck naked dudes. Or don't actually fuck naked dudes. Y'all know what I mean. Okay, I'll stop talking now. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time, everybody.